Now, the Boss of Fáilte Ireland will today call for the country to reopen to overseas tourists as soon and as fast as public health considerations can allow. Meanwhile, Irish people who have paid for a holiday are being encouraged not to travel, with jobs at stake and no sign of compensation for consumers. What's the story? Well, Eoghan Corry, editor of Air and Travel magazine, is on the line. Hi, Eoghan, how are you?
Good morning, Jen, and thank you for that valuable piece of life advice. Never date a Kardashian.
There we go. Yeah, it will ruin you. It will absolutely ruin you.
I've written it down.
You're very welcome. So you're very welcome back to the show. This saga has been going on for nearly a week now. Let's start with the Chief Medical Officer. What exactly did he say last Friday?
He said last Friday that people should not travel. He also said that people who had booked holidays should cancel bookings. This became hugely significant, really, because of the absence of any official government guidance or policy on this, Jen. And if we were to, nobble all our confusion and put it all down into one phrase, that's it. The government policy is not changed. It's back where it was in March, all but essential travel to the rest of the world. It's not prohibited, but it's advised against. Big implications for insurance. That's really as far as it goes. Flights can come and go as normal, and they have been. And we had more than 80 departures out of Dublin Airport yesterday. Much the same tomorrow. It'll go up to about 100 tomorrow. Much the same today, and it'll go up to about 100 tomorrow. So all of this is happening while we have this debate going on with the Chief Medical Officer expressing what are effectively personal opinions that people should cancel bookings, and because people are getting no guidance of any other direction, they are really, really, really confused and scared. And we're very slow to the plate here, Jen, because back in the end of May the 27th, the European Union came out with a policy for reopening borders in an orderly fashion. It was very disorderly when the outbreak came to Italy and everybody started shuttering their borders. But they brought in a policy that everybody would open around June the 15th. All but half a dozen countries made that deadline. And then in June the 12th, the European aviation people with the European Centre of Disease Control came out with aviation measures. Important points there would be there'd be no social distancing on aircraft because they regard aircraft with HEPA filters as safe, so middle seats would be occupied, all of that. But in Ireland, we're supposed to have protocols to either, adopt these or select what bits of it we'd like to adopt. And there was some movement on aviation yesterday, but certainly our travel advisories are back in the March the 12th, and it's quite clear the whole rest of the world has changed since then. We'll have another update from the European Union probably tomorrow, and because maybe we were changing government or because nothing else was happening, the words of the Chief Medical Officer, and he's doing his job, nobody's going to criticise him for saying we want 0 cases of COVID, and that means 0 chance of importing cases. But the checks and balances that are normally in, he's there to advise. The checks and balances that are supposed to be in there before it becomes official policy have either been parked or people are just being silent.
So people are still travelling. Are we seeing an increase in passengers on flights as the days go by?
Without doubt.
Right.
We would have had April the 12th was probably the lowest with 12 departures from Dublin Airport. Wow. Back up to 80 yesterday, about 4,000. Well, we'd have about 116,000 going to the airport at this time of the year, Jen, in Dublin. Shannon and Cork were also reopened yesterday. We're not forgetting them at all. But just talking about Dublin, there would be 4,000 went through on Monday, and that would be up considerably yesterday to maybe 12 or 14,000. Ryanair have 1,000 flights in the air across Europe yesterday, and they're reporting a load factor of about 70% across those. So it's low for July, Jen, but it's actually the beginning of a return to normality for travel across Europe. And in the meantime, we don't really have anything except the personal opinion of the Chief Medical Officer and of NFET, and there's a chorus of other medics, saying international travel is not a good idea. But the rest of Europe has said that we need to get moving again and we need to reopen the borders again, or the whole system and the basis of the open border tourism industries, the trading, the international exports, all of those foreign direct investment, all of those other parts of the economy which are not the responsibility of the chief medical officer, will start falling apart.
Absolutely. As you said, the National Public Health Emergency Team meet today. Do you think we'll see any change in their stance?
I think the debate will be quite strong. What they've been pushing for, Jan, is that they want the 14-day self-isolation, that people returning to Ireland or visiting Ireland, it's not mandated by law. It's sort of almost you decide you're going to do it, and if you break it, nobody can actually prosecute you or do anything about it. The reality is most people want to do the responsible thing and they're following it. They want that strengthened. They want that given some sort of legal basis. The rest of the government departments are all saying this is going too far, because the quarantine is an unusual one. We're the last country with it, apart from our neighbours, our very high-profile neighbours. But they, Poland has a version, Slovakia has a version, that has to be said. But across Europe, they're unusual. And it gives this message to the rest of Europe that Ireland is not welcoming visitors, is not open for business. That's not the biggest deal in July when not many people are travelling. But the big German tour operators, Jan, have been contacting customers who have holidays booked in Ireland to the end of the year and saying Ireland is closed for business. Here's a country that's open for business, very often a country with a higher COVID rate than we have, and saying this is your alternative, go there instead, because we can't guarantee Ireland. So it's I know people say the economy must fall down the list when it comes to saving lives, but at some stage, having made the big decisions to do all the things we did to protect lives, we've got to start thinking about the 200,000 tourism jobs at stake and all of that. And back to the days of the Black Death, Jen, it's been far easier to make the decision to pull up a drawbridge than to decide when to let it back down again. And letting it back down again is the debate we're having now.
If you've paid for a trip and you choose not to fly, will travel insurance cover you?
Simple, no.
Right. Okay. Will health insurance cover people who do fly?
Interestingly enough, the health aspect of the travel insurance will not.
Okay.
That it depends on when the booking was made. I said a simple no, but there are all sorts of issues here. If you book the flight before March the 12th, you're covered for everything, but for the health insurance end of it. And the terms and conditions of those policies, which all looked, travel insurance was complicated enough, a lot of them are being treated on a case-by-case basis, and very similar cases are being allowed and others disallowed. But back to the health, and this is an important one. The European health insurance card that your listeners be very familiar with, that little blue card, the EHIC card, entitles you to medical care across the European Union. Most of where we're flying to now is within the European Union, our associated countries that have the EHIC. Obviously, the big destinations abroad like America, places like that, there's no chance of getting any health cover. But if you have the EHIC card, it's a different legislation, different basis, and it entitles you to medical attention when you're abroad. All the other things about travel insurance, like your lost bag or having to cancel a flight due to a death of a near relative, they won't apply because of the DFA advisory. But what you can do is, what people who are flying, and a lot of them are flying yesterday out to, as the routes reopen to Spain and Portugal and places like that, it's the EHIC that they will be using in the event of a health emergency.
Can I ask you, what is it like flying? What's Dublin Airport, for example, like at the moment? Is there temperature checking? Is there sufficient sanitizer? Or is it business as normal? What's it actually like to get on a plane in this day and age?
A bit different. There have been 900 sanitizers through Dublin Airport. Face masks must be worn on board. The airlines have the chance of denying you boarding if you aren't wearing a face mask. Okay. And while on board, if you take your face mask off, you're allowed to take it off briefly for eating and drinking. But if you do what the stag party on its way to Benidorm would do and take them all off immediately, you will be asked to put them back on again. If you through the airport, the social distancing in the queue areas. Things like security, they've got some of the bays closed off, they've got some of the tray areas closed off. And there is dispensing machines for face masks, should you not have one. It is as close to social distancing as you're going to get in an airport, and the numbers aren't huge at the moment. And they will probably grow and put them under pressure. But it isn't that different from what the supermarkets did. I mean, anyone who would have sat down in March and said, we're going to have social distancing at supermarket checkout, everybody would have said, you're crazy. But it all seemed to work with floor markings and with compliance and all of that. On board, no social distancing, but masks must be worn at all time.
So no social distancing on the plane. You could be sitting beside somebody, a complete stranger, not in your group, and that's just the way it is.
That's the way it works.
Different airlines,
what the airlines say is everybody wearing masks.
Okay.
The other important thing the aviation industry has in its favour is the filtering systems in aircraft are up to hospital grade level. The HEPA filters, they recycle the air every 2 minutes for the aircraft. So it is as safe an environment as you're going to get in the current outside of a hospital operating theatre.
Wow.
The real issue then becomes while that works for your flight, and then you have everyone's wearing the mask to prevent the sneezing, the stranger beside you sneezing. The getting to and from that aircraft mightn't be as safe.
Okay, it's getting to and from. So what about these air bridges, and where are they? And is that changing on a daily basis?
It isn't even changing on a daily basis because we don't know where they are.
Okay, because I saw some stuff online. It's like back in the day when we got those WhatsApp messages that people send you. I'm getting these messages now of where these air bridges are, and I don't know what to believe. So they haven't been confirmed yet.
Not at all. We don't have the list yet. You see, what's been happening across Europe with air bridges, and it was sort of a trendy idea in the rest of Europe about a month ago. Then everybody sort of decided that it wasn't worth doing it, that countries would have a fluid policy where, individual countries, if their caseload got bad, would be excluded from their open list. But what happened with the air bridges seems to be, and it became a big deal in Boris Johnson's world. And the way it fed into Irish politics, I don't know, I think a lot of people watch Sky News or something. It was talked about for a couple of weeks. It's been talked about for more than 10 days now. They've talked about green lists and red lists, and they have hinted at how they're going to decide them, but they haven't actually named any countries. What most countries are doing, Jen, is there's a 7-day rolling average of cases, or a 14-day. Most countries are using the 14-day, some are using the 7-day. The countries that show up on the list tend to be Sweden, controversial as everybody knows because of its policy not locking down everything. The other countries that tend to show up would be Bulgaria, which is 2 flights out of Dublin this morning, Romania, which is 2 flights out of Dublin today, and Poland, which is huge for Irish traffic. So many Polish people with friends and relatives they have to get back to, and so many people in Poland with friends and relatives here that they have to get into. It could be that they will show up on a red list. What is a bit more drastic is the suggestion by the Chief Medical Officer, and remember, this is not policy, this is his advice to the government, that any country with a higher rate than Ireland should be on the red list and any country with a lower rate should be on the green list. That would be pretty drastic because it would cut out an awful lot of Europe. So to answer your question on air bridges, you get the impression that somebody came out with the idea, everybody wrote it down, and then when they went around to filling out the details, it got a bit complicated for them. And we are now waiting 2 weeks later for a list. July the 9th is when the quarantine comes up for review. NFIT's decision today might be feeding into that. They would probably want the quarantine kept. They might want it even more heavily enforced. And the big question is, with the new chiefs in power in Leinster House, will they follow more closely the NFIT advice? Because some of it was rejected, not so much by Simon Harris, but by his colleagues at Cabinet. Under the previous administration, or will they decide to go down the strengthening quarantine, closed for business, let's write off 2020 in both directions for aviation, or will they follow the European model? Because the European model will have evolved even further by tomorrow with the attempt. You see, Europe treats the whole tourism industry, they see us going to Spain as domestic tourism. They want us to be part of the rebuilding of European life and European economic life, and maybe and they'll be moving that on tomorrow. But I don't know what's going to happen in terms of what Ireland's response is and whether we will have a list of countries on the green list for air bridges or not. I think it's irrelevant, by the way, Jen. People are flying anyway, and the government doesn't have the power to stop the flights.
That is key. That what you said just there. Do you think things are going to change? Do you think after the advice from Tony Holohan, they will change their policy, the government?
Oh, no. It's too difficult. It changed. I think we have a constitutional right to travel. We're a big travel country. We all have grannies in Boston and great uncles that were on the missions in Africa. So it's a big one for them to actually step in and ban flights. The only countries that have done that have been the pretty autocratic countries, former dictatorships in the east of Europe, and obviously countries around the world have moved in to ban flights. It's a big deal to do that. I don't think we'll be doing that.
So the question is, do we keep flying and try and save these 200,000 jobs in the travel and aviation sector? Eoghan Corry, editor of Air and Travel magazine, thank you so much for taking our call. Very informative as always, and it's been an absolute eye-opener for me.